Hey folks, today I want to talk to you about evolutionary psychology. This is a topic I've been thinking about for a while. I've made a lot of videos about Jordan Peterson, and evolutionary psychology is very popular amongst certain right-wingers because it has a way of reifying and justifying current situations very well. But I feel I need to make very precise criticisms of it because I think sometimes us on the left we dismiss it out of hand just too easily, and I think in order for us to be convincing, we need to do a better job of specifying exactly what we find wrong with it. Now, I don't have a problem with the principles or the general idea behind evolutionary psychology in and of itself. The basic idea of evolutionary psychology being that our psychology evolved as a consequence of our environment just as much as our physiology. This seems obvious, and I don't think we should really argue with that. What I have a problem with are the specific claims evolutionary psychologists try to make. These are often poorly supported, and they end up being what we call just so stories. They're a cute little story, they provide a narrative, but when you actually look at the evidence behind them, there's really not much there. When evolutionary psychologists or people who are proponents of it make a claim to try and justify something using evolutionary psychology, often what they'll do is they'll point to a specific study, but when you actually look at these studies, what you find is a small sample size that isn't very broad. It doesn't take into account many different cultures and things like that. If you have a study that is done and it's 100 or so people who are college students or grad students in one particular university, it's interesting. It might tell you something, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what the proponents of evolutionary psychology claim it's telling you. Furthermore, there's a huge replication crisis in all of psychology right now, and evolutionary psychology is, of course, no stranger to this. If you would like to hear somebody who's an actual psychologist dig very deeply into some of these studies and, someone who has a little more specific expertise, I will link in the description of this video to a podcast by Dr. Kirk Honda, who is a psychologist in Seattle. He has a podcast called Psychology in Seattle, where he talks about these issues specifically. One of the big problems with evolutionary psychology is it assumes that we can differentiate culture from biology. And I find this not true. When you look at these studies and when you look at human beings, it's very difficult to pull culture and biology apart. We have so many assumptions that we think are based in biology, but are actually not based in biology. They're based in culture. And culture makes you not see this. Culture makes you think of things as natural, as the way things always are, or the way things should be because of evolution. And I find this incredibly wrong-headed.
Evolutionary psychology, as it's now called, sociobiology, used to be, teaches us about the nature of humans. But the problem is it doesn't teach us anything much at all. It's an extremely hard scientific problem to understand the nature of any organism, say insects. We can do any experiment you like. When you get to something as complex as human beings, what you just find is almost anything you look for. You want to find aggressiveness and violence and sadism. Yeah, we can find that. We don't need evolutionary psychology to tell us about it. We see it in the world. You want to find self-sacrifice, courage, integrity, a willingness to sacrifice yourself for some totally, remote species. Like you can find that. You can find what you look for. Humans have all of these capacities.
It is not my purpose here to go into the problems with individual studies in evolutionary psychology. To do that subject justice, it would take much too long than I plan to spend on this video. For that, you can check out the podcast I linked to and this piece that gives a very even-handed criticism of the infamous Google memo. This piece appeared in Wired magazine. It details the big gap between a lot of the science cited by James Damore in his memo and the claims he tries to make off of them. I find this another problem with evolutionary psychology. Journalists and other people make claims that exaggerate or go beyond the claims made by the studies and the scientists who conducted them. Science is much more reserved when it comes to making claims than people who try to leverage it for their politics or journalists who want to have a story for people to click on. Damore actually makes some claims that are uncontroversial, but not necessarily applicable to Google in the ways that he thinks. Evolutionary psychology has a problem studying things because you can't separate biology from culture. As Chomsky has pointed out, human beings are incredibly complicated organisms. You could try to create a study, but that study would probably be unethical. It would involve raising people without culture, which, in addition to being pretty impossible, any attempt to do so would be horrific.
It's a special isolation chamber. The subject pulls levers to receive food and warmth. The floor can become electrified, and showers of icy water randomly fall on the subject. I call it the Monroe box.
Well, it sounds interesting. How much will it cost to build?
Oh, that's the beauty part. It's already built. I need the money to buy a baby to raise in the box until the age of 30.
What are you trying to prove?
Well, my theory is that the subject will be socially maladjusted and will harbor a deep resentment towards me.
Interesting.
Now, this being said, I'm not entirely against evolutionary psychology in principle. As a good leftist, none other than Noam Chomsky has said mildly positive things about it. He's even stated that, Kropotkin's famous work, Mutual Aid, in some senses, by our standards today, could be considered a work of evolutionary psychology. It's just that in that case, instead of doing what evolutionary psychologists seem to do today, which is reify or reinforce the idea of hierarchy and competition, it seeks to make the opposite argument. It seeks to show that, no, there's lots of cooperation within nature, and that is as much responsible for our development and good ecosystems and good cultures as anything else. And this really seems to be the problem with evolutionary psychology. When you get right down to it, you could make an argument for anything. There's rape in human culture. Well, you can make an evolutionary psychology argument why there's rape, and that's fine. And people have done that. And on the converse end, you can make an argument for altruistic things. So at the end of the day, what it really shows is you can use it for anything. And that's not exactly scientific. And I think that is ultimately my problem with it. I don't have any problem with some of the statements that people make when they're discussing things in the realm of evolutionary psychology. I wouldn't have any problem with them if they identified them as their own subjective or their own political views. But what I don't like is how they try and put an objective or scientific kind of gloss on it, as if, well, this is from evolutionary psychology, and so therefore it's true, and if you deny this, you deny science, and you're stupid, and science, right? We've encountered those people on the internet, right? The thing that really made me think about this, and the way I came across evolutionary psychology, and to be quite honest, I will admit, I was initially somewhat taken in by some of the ideas. Because around the time that I first started to hear it become popular, around 2016, my daughter had just been born. I have a son who's about 2 years older. And like all parents do, I started to notice the differences between my children. And like all parents do, I wondered, well, how do I account for these differences? Are these differences in their personality, just plain and simple? Are these differences between a boy and a girl? Are these differences between my first child and my second child? I don't think I'm raising them differently. I think I'm raising them completely the same. But I'm also aware that culture makes you kind of oblivious to some of these things, you don't necessarily realize that you might treat your son and your daughter differently. But I don't have any problem with, adults saying, well, I noticed this and blah, 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 blah. That's fine. Parents do that all the time. You know why I don't mind it? Because I'm not pretending it's like some sort of objective scientific truth. It's just kind of an observation. It's my own little pet theories about why girls are like this and boys are like this. And I'm not, trying to say anything objective about it. On the other hand, I'm not saying that children are completely moldable, because that has its own problems, and it's also the type of caricature that evolutionary psychologists like to hold up of people who disagree with them. They like to say, oh, well, you just believe in a blank slate. You believe humans can be made to do anything, and that's going to lead to, horrible totalitarian apparatus trying to, change people and mold them to fit into whatever categories and whatever behaviors. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here is the people who do like evolutionary psychology. Have you noticed lately, I brought up Kropotkin earlier and Chomsky, but have you noticed that the people who tend to buy in very heavily to evolutionary psychology are conservative by nature? They are reactionary by nature. It's very obvious why this is. I mean, you have something that is inherently looking to the past to justify itself, right? You have something that's inherently looking back and saying, well, we did this in the past, that's why we're like this, that's natural. If you deviate from that, then you're fighting against nature, you're fighting against science. It is inherently going to keep people stuck in the same place. Now, again, I'm not saying that we should go completely full tilt in the opposite direction. I believe there are limits. I believe there are, it seems self-evident to me that our psychology is shaped by our evolution. I just think that it is incredibly difficult to figure out exactly how and to, quantify it. And this is something I have a problem with. I feel like when you get into quantifying certain things, that's tricky. You want to quantify intelligence? Pretty soon you're measuring people's skulls and trying to compare the intelligence of different races, or whatever the modern equivalent of it is, whether that's IQ tests or whatever. This type of thing has a road that it brings you down, which is inherently reactionary. And I find that not a place we really need to go. Which raises the question, why are these people so obsessed with this? One of the things I find interesting is this obsession with sex differences. Well, why won't anyone talk about sex differences? It's like, well, why are you so interested in talking about sex differences? Why is it so important to you? Well, the left won't talk about this. Maybe not. Maybe we don't. Maybe we're not interested. Maybe we'd rather talk about the fact that children being locked in cages on the border, or the fact that the planet is being cooked and we're running out of resources and pretty soon shit could get really fucking bad. But please, tell me about the differences between men and women and how ignoring them is going to cause the end of civilization. This is fucking bullshit, people. And it's the way that pedants like to score points and feel intellectually superior. But at the end of the day, this stuff it's not important. So that's it for this video, folks. If you really like this, please like, share, and subscribe.
I will have some premium content available soon for patrons at the Rebel level and up. That's the $5 a month tier. I will be talking about psychedelics,
how to take them safely and sanely,
and with a little luck, interview some leftist media folks on the role they have played in their lives. I might also talk about some taboo sexual subjects at some point. I think you will enjoy it, and I hope you will check it out.
Thanks for watching, everyone. I'm Greg Belvedere. Remember, all generalizations are stupid, so never speak in absolutes. Rebel Base, out.
Wow. Bye.